On the 7th of March, 1941, Margaret Ethel Howard stood in the bitter cold outside King's Cross Station, watching her entire future dissolve into the smoke-choked London sky.
Oh.
The telegram had arrived that morning. It's delivered by a boy who couldn't have been older than 12, his face smudged with ash from the previous night's bombing. Her hands had trembled as she unfolded it, expecting news of her brother James, missing since Dunkirk. Instead, the message contained a single typed line. "Your services are required. Report to room 40, Foreign Office, 1400 hours today. Destroy this message." Margaret crushed the telegram in her palm, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. She was 22 years old, a mathematics lecturer at Bedford College, who had published exactly one paper on probability. Theory that precisely for people in Britain had understood. She had no military connections, no political affiliations, nothing that should have brought her to the attention of anyone in Whitehall. Yet here she was, standing outside the station with a small leather suitcase, watching soldiers stream past her toward troop trains heading God knew where. The Foreign Office building loomed before her like a gray fortress, its windows covered with blast tape forming elaborate spiderwebs across the glass. She climbed the steps, her shoes clicking against stone worn smooth by centuries of civil servants entering and exiting with the weight of empire on their shoulders. The guard at the entrance checked her identity card 3 times, his eyes moving between her face and the photograph with practiced suspicion. Room 40 was not a room at all, but a corridor that led to another corridor, which terminated at a door guarded by 2 men in civilian clothes who somehow looked more military than any soldiers she had passed outside. One of them examined a list on a clipboard, found her name, and opened the door without a word. Inside, a woman in her mid-30s sat behind a desk that held nothing but a single manila folder and a telephone. She wore a navy blue suit that hung slightly loose on her frame, suggesting recent weight loss or simply the rationing that had begun to hollow out everyone in Britain. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, and her eyes held the particular exhaustion Margaret had come to recognize in those who worked through the bombing raids rather than sheltering from them. "Miss Howard," the woman said, not rising, "I am Commander Patricia Henley, though you will not remember my name after you leave this room." "Sit down," Margaret sat. The chair was uncomfortable, deliberately so. "You published a paper last year in the Journal of Applied Mathematics," Henley continued, opening the folder, "on the application of frequency analysis to polyalphabetic substitution ciphers. It was, to be frank, the most tedious thing I have ever forced myself to read. It was also brilliant. Thank you, I think." It was not a compliment. It was an observation. Henley closed the folder and leaned forward. "How many languages do you speak? German, French, passable Italian?" "I can read Latin and ancient Greek. And you grew up where?" "Sussex." "My father was a vicar. Your brother James served with the 2nd Battalion Royal Sussex Regiment. Evacuated from Dunkirk with severe wounds, he is currently recovering at a hospital in Surrey." Margaret felt her throat tighten. "He's alive?" "Very much so. You will be permitted to visit him once before you begin your assignment, but you will not tell him where you are going or what you will be doing. In fact, you will tell no one anything about your work for the duration of the war and for the rest of your natural life. Is that clear?" "I don't even know what the work is." Henley stood and walked to the window, hands clasped behind her back. "Germany is winning this war, Miss Howard. They control France, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Norway, Denmark, the Low Countries, and much of North Africa. They are bombing our cities into rubble, where most critically their U-boats are sinking our merchant ships faster than we can build them. We are an island nation, Miss Howard. We import 70% of our food and virtually all of our oil. If the Atlantic convoys fail, we starve. If we starve, we surrender. It is precisely that simple." She turned back to face Margaret. "The Germans communicate with their U-boat fleet using a cipher machine called Enigma. It is, by every conventional metric, unbreakable. The number of possible combinations for any given message is approximately 115.9 million. Even if you had 1,000 people testing combinations day and night, it would take centuries to decrypt a single message. But you're breaking it anyway," Margaret said quietly. Henley's expression did not change, but something flickered in her eyes. Approval, perhaps. A relief at not having to waste time with a slow student. "We have a facility," she said. "It is not in London." You will be taken there tonight, and you will remain there until the war ends, or until you are no longer useful. The work is tedious beyond measure. It is mentally exhausting. It will consume every waking hour and most of your sleeping ones. You will live in billets with other women, whose names you will not reveal to anyone outside. You will form no romantic attachments with the men there, of whom there are many. You will write no letters that are not censored. You will keep no diary. You will tell no stories in your old age. This work will be the most important thing you ever do, and you will never be thanked for it, never be recognized, never be allowed to speak of it. If you refuse this assignment right now, you will return to Bedford College and resume your teaching, and no one will think less of you. Margaret thought of the ship sinking in the Atlantic. She thought of her brother James, who would come home from France with his left arm mangled and his eyes holding horrors he would never speak of. She thought of the German bombers that came every night, of the children evacuated to the countryside, of the ration books and the gas masks, and the ever-present knowledge that invasion might come any day. "What do I need to do?" she asked. Henley pulled a document from her desk drawer. "Sign this. It is the Official Secrets Act. Breaking it carries a penalty of 14 years in prison, assuming you survive the treason trial. The Crown takes an extremely dim view of loose lips in wartime." Margaret signed without reading it. Good Henley picked up the telephone and spoke quietly into it. "She's ready. Send the car." She hung up and looked at Margaret again. "You have 2 hours to visit your brother. Tell him you are being assigned to clerical work for the War Office. Tell him you love him. Then meet the car outside the Savoy Hotel at 1700 hours precisely. Bring only what you can carry. You will not be returning to your flat." "Where am I going?" "A place called Bletchley Park. It is 50 miles northwest of London. And until the day you die, you will never tell anyone what happens there." The hospital in Surrey smelled of carbolic acid and something darker underneath. The sweet rot scent of wounds that were healing badly or not at all. Margaret found James in a ward with 30 other men, his left arm bandaged from shoulder to wrist, his face gaunt and pale against the white pillow. He smiled when he saw her, and for a moment he looked like the brother who had taught her to ride a bicycle, who had defended her against schoolyard bullies, who had promised their dying mother that he would always watch over his little sister. "Mags," he said, his voice hoarse, "they told me you couldn't visit." "I pulled strings," she lied, sitting on the edge of his bed.
"How are you?"
"Alive." Which is more than most of the lads from 2nd Battalion can say his right hand found hers and squeezed. "We held the line at Dunkirk so the others could get to the boats. Germans came at us with everything they had, Stukas, tanks, infantry. We held for 2 days with almost no ammunition. When the shells ran out, we used rifles. When the rifles ran out, we used whatever we could find." "Your arm?" "Shrapnel from an 88. Tore through muscle and bone like paper. The surgeon says I'll keep it, but I'll never have full use of it again, which means I'm out of the war. Home guard, maybe, if I'm lucky." He laughed bitterly. "Home guard, guarding against an invasion everyone knows is coming while the real soldiers fight and die. You did your part, James. You got our boys home, and now it's up to others." He studied her face. "You look different, scared. What's happened?" She told him the lie Henley had prepared. "Clerical work. War Office. Boring but important. Can't talk about it." He nodded, accepting it the way soldiers learn to accept orders that made no sense. "You be careful, Mags," he said. "London's getting hit hard. They're targeting everything now. Doesn't matter if it's a military installation or a hospital or a school. They just drop their bombs and fly away." "I'll be careful," she promised, knowing she would not be in London, knowing she could not tell him that, knowing this might be the last time she saw him. They talked for another hour about nothing important. Their childhood in Sussex, their father's terrible sermons, the dog they had owned who was afraid of thunderstorms. The normalcy of it felt obscene given the circumstances, but Margaret clung to it anyway. When visiting hours ended, she kissed his forehead and told him she loved him. "I love you too, Mags," he said. "And whatever this clerical work really is, whatever they're not telling me, you do it well. We need every advantage we can get." She wondered how much he had guessed. James had always been perceptive. The car that picked her up outside the Savoy Hotel was a black Austin with government plates and a driver who spoke not a single word during the entire journey. They left London as the sun was setting, heading northwest through countryside that seemed impossibly peaceful compared to the bombed-out ruins of the city. Villages passed by in the gathering darkness, their windows covered with blackout curtains, their streets empty except for the occasional home guard patrol. 2 hours later, the car turned off the main road onto a narrow lane that wound between high hedgerows. Security checkpoints appeared every quarter mile, each one more thorough than the last. Soldiers checked documents, peered into the car's interior, consulted lists. At the final checkpoint, a guard circled the vehicle with a torch, checking underneath for explosives. Then they were through, and Bletchley Park revealed itself in the moonlight. It was not impressive. A Victorian mansion squatted in the center of the grounds, ugly and asymmetric, surrounded by temporary wooden huts that looked like they had been thrown together in a desperate hurry. People moved between the buildings despite the late hour, their shadows long and strange in the carefully shaded lights that complied with blackout regulations. The car stopped in front of one of the huts. The driver finally spoke. "Hut 8. Commander Henley's expecting you." Margaret stepped out into the cold March air, carrying her small leather suitcase, and walked toward the door. Behind her, she heard the car drive away. Suddenly, she felt utterly alone, as if she had crossed some invisible border into a country from which there was no return. She opened the door. Inside, 40 people worked in silence, so intense it felt physical. They sat at wooden tables covered with papers, their heads bent in concentration, their fingers moving across cipher sheets with the practiced speed of concert pianists. The air smelled of cigarette smoke, tea, and nervous sweat. Nobody looked up when she entered. Commander Henley materialized at her elbow. "Welcome to Bletchley Park, Miss Howard. This is Hut 8. This is where we break the German naval Enigma. And this is where you will spend every day until either we win this war or the Germans sink every merchant ship we have." She led Margaret to an empty desk in the corner. On it sat a stack of encrypted messages, each one representing a German U-boat somewhere in the Atlantic, hunting Allied convoys. Each one represented hundreds of sailors who would live or die depending on whether the people in this hut could read what the Germans were saying to each other. "Your training begins tomorrow at 0600 hours, Henley said. "But tonight I want you to look at these messages. Study them. Feel the weight of them. Every delay, every failure, every moment we spend, confused or uncertain costs lives. Hundreds of lives. Thousands. The Germans sank 43 merchant ships last month alone. 100,000 tons of shipping. Food, fuel, weapons, supplies. All of it sitting at the bottom of the Atlantic." She placed a photograph on the desk. It showed the wreckage of a merchant vessel, its hull torn open, bodies floating in the oil-slicked water. This was the SS Arakaka, sunk 2 weeks ago by U-boat 106. Of the crew of 73, only 11 survived. The rest drowned, or died of hypothermia in the freezing water. This is what failure looks like, Miss Howard. This is what happens every time we fail to break the codes in time. Margaret stared at the photograph, her hands trembling. Somewhere in the stack of encrypted messages in front of her might be the orders that would send another boat to sink another ship, to kill another 73 men, to send another convoy to the bottom of the ocean. "Can we really do this?" she whispered. "Can we really break something that's supposed to be unbreakable?" Henley's expression softened slightly. "We already have partially."
"But the Germans keep changing their procedures, adding new wheels, modifying their networks. We break it, they change it, we break it again."
"It is an arms race conducted in mathematics and statistics, and we are losing. We need people like you, people who see patterns others miss, people who can think faster and deeper than anyone thought possible." She straightened. "Get some rest, Miss Howard. Tomorrow you learn how to save 10,000 ships. But tonight, just remember why you're here." Margaret sat alone at her desk long after Henley left, staring at the encrypted messages, at the photograph of the dead sailors, at the future she had chosen. Outside, somewhere in the darkness, German U-boats prowled the Atlantic hunting their prey. And here, in this ugly wooden hut, in the middle of England, a 22-year-old mathematics lecturer prepared to fight back with nothing but her mind. She picked up the first encrypted message. The letters meant nothing yet. They were just random characters. Nonsense. Chaos. But somewhere in that chaos was a pattern. Somewhere in that meaningless jumble of letters was the information that could save lives. She would find it. She had to. The alternative was unthinkable.